Well, folks, the Clemson football season is already pretty much a wash, and their college football playoff hopes are now down the drain. Last night, we saw the Duke Blue Devils upset the Clemson Tigers, and in one of the weirdest games we've seen in recent memory, Clemson only scored 7 points, despite getting into the red zone nearly 8 times. It was a very disappointing showing for their new quarterback, Clemson. The coaching staff seemingly had no idea what was going on, Dabo Swinney looked confused, and Duke enjoyed the monumental win. Mike Elko has done a tremendous job at Duke so far, and Riley Leonard is one of the most underrated players in the country. All offseason, I thought Duke had a real chance to at least compete in this game or win, and now it looks like that actually happened. In today's video though, we're going to focus our attention on Clemson. We're going to go through what the heck happened last night, talk about the reaction from around the college football world, my thoughts on them moving forward, how they could finish the season, and how this all happened. But before we get started, quickly be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new and love college football content, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now, let's get started and talk about what the heck just happened to Clemson football. In terms of last night's game, it was absolutely ridiculous. In completely stunning fashion, Duke dominated number 9 Clemson and ended up winning 28-7. As I said, this was a landmark game and a huge monumental win for Mike Elko, and going into the game, Duke didn't have that much of a chance. They are nearly 2 touchdown underdogs, and they ended up beating Clemson for the first time since 2004. This was also their first victory over a top 10 opponent since they beat ironically number 7 Clemson in 1989. At that time, their head coach was Steve Spurrier. Last night after the game, Swinney said, quote, "We couldn't get out of our own way. It was routine basic stuff that we did not do." There was definitely a lot of foolishness that went on last night. We have some other things we're going to talk about first. His team looked unprepared, they were unimpressive, and definitely did not deserve to be a top 10 team. It was beyond humiliating, and Dabo also had this to say, quote, "That is the weirdest game I've ever been a part of. I've been beat, I've had my butt kicked, but that's the strangest game I've ever been a part of." On paper, there was no reason for Clemson to lose this game. They were the better team, had the better coaching staff, and had 56 blue-chip recruits compared to Duke only having 2. Clemson's roster was littered with 4- and 5-star talents, but at the end of the day, a team full of 3 stars and a 3-star quarterback ended up being the better team, plain and simple. What's crazy is everyone thought this year was going to be completely different for them. They came into the 2023 season with a new offensive coordinator, as Garrett Riley was insane at TCU and helped coach Max Duggan and that horn-frogged offense into one of the best units in the country. They also brought back Clemson, and many consistently blamed DJ Uyunglele for the pitfalls and said that Cade would never turn into him. Last night, Clemson couldn't get out of their own way. They had multiple red zone miscues, including a 23-yard blocked field goal and 2 fumbles outside the goal line. One of those was a huge momentum crusher, as just a couple plays later, Duke would score a touchdown. Duke completely outdueled Clemson on offense thanks to their quarterback Riley Leonard. His best play of the night came on a 44-yard run, and that gave them a 13-7 lead. From there, they never looked back, and Leonard finished the game with 273 total yards to go along with a touchdown. Clemson can't say they didn't have their chances though, but they shot themselves in the foot multiple times. As I said, they made it into Duke territory 8 of their 13 possessions and didn't even punt a single time in the second half, yet they just had 1 touchdown with all of those short fields. The downfall for Clemson last night was their woeful red zone performance and just all those mistakes they made down when it mattered. Swinney said, quote, "It's almost indescribable what I just saw. It's incredibly frustrating when you had so much opportunity, and it's routine stuff. It's basic stuff. It's the fundamentals." The offense wasn't great either, as Clemson was limited to pretty much just short passes for the entirety of the game. He finished with 209 yards passing, and that averaged out to just under 5 yards per attempt, and he also had an interception. His only touchdown of the night came on a dump-off pass to Will Shipley, and that is not the Clemson offense we are used to seeing. With guys like Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, there is always threats for a big play. Honestly, I don't really know where the blame goes to. Statistically, Clemson wasn't absolutely awful though. They outgained Duke by 48 yards, had 29 first downs compared to Duke's 17, and still yet only had 1 touchdown. It marked the first time in 59 games that Swinney had over 200 yards rushing and passing and lost the game. While many are going to focus on how bad Clemson was, I think a lot of people need to give Duke more credit. Mike Elko spent time at Texas A&M and Notre Dame and was a great hire from the get-go. He was someone I was really high on last year, and last season, the Blue Devils won 9 games. They have gutsy players, they're well coached, and they buy into the whole underdog mentality. Many would have thought that Clemson was the better quarterback, but Leonard was the one who showed a ton of poise, and he was going against one of the best defensive fronts in all of college football. yet Leonard never panicked and honestly didn't get pressured too much. In terms of the battle of the trenches, Duke won that. Their offensive line had no problem taking care of the Tigers' defense, and Riley wasn't sacked once all night, and Duke's running backs averaged 5.3 yards per rush. For the first time in a long time, the Tigers' big-time defense was outclassed by a conference opponent. Perhaps more importantly, Duke had the same amount of speed, if not better, than the Tigers. Besides a few good years under David Cutcliffe, Duke has been one of the worst teams in the ACC and has been on the doormat. But as I said, they've won 10 of their last 14 games under Mike Elko, and if he continues at this rate, he might get poached by a bigger school or help build Duke into a solid contender, and they might have more to look forward to than just basketball. Switching gears a little bit, Cade Klubnik had a ton of hype going into this year. He was a 5-star recruit, and all of last season, Clemson fans were begging for him to replace DJ Uiagalelei. Everyone kept talking about how bad DJ was and how Cade was going to fix everything. I guess that didn't end up happening, and despite having some Heisman hype this year, Klubnik was just not able to figure it out last night. I saw a viral clip on Twitter where Klubnik ran to the sideline and Dabo tried to give him a high five, and Klubnik gave him his elbow. At least that's what I saw from my angle, and I wonder if there's something brewing behind the scenes. With them bringing in Garrett Riley, many expected Cade to bring them back to the glory days of Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, or those 2 games that DJ played in 2020. So, who was to blame for all this? Well, many think that Sweeney and Garrett Riley deserve a lot more blame than Klubnik himself. He completed 14 of 21 passes in the first half, but only had 103 yards. The only deep pass he attempted was an 18-yard pass to Antonio Williams, and that was only because it was the end of the half. Everything seemed very vanilla, and it didn't seem like they trusted Cade. Did Klubnik do something in practice that made the staff reluctant to let him play? I don't know. Those questions probably won't be answered by anybody, and we'll get no clarity, and Dabo will say everything is fine, but the second half didn't change that narrative. He completed 13 of 23 passes for 124 yards, and that was when Clemson needed him most, and they needed the win. It's not like Klubnik is some slouch, as he won the MVP in the 2022 ACC Championship game, and that was against a decent North Carolina team, so I really wonder what the heck is going on. Last year, DJ pretty much shouldered all the blame for the Clemson offense, and now I feel bad for the guy. After Clemson just scored 7 points last night, many are probably starting to wonder if DJ was ever really the problem. It also doesn't help that DJ had 5 touchdowns in his debut against Oregon State, and it looks like he is going to get the last laugh. For Clemson fans right now, there's a growing concern going on. They've lost more games in the last 3 years than they did in the previous 6. Given the history and how the last 2 years have gone, Clemson's ACC title hopes could be in serious jeopardy right now. Sweeney said, quote, "We've not had a championship team that didn't win the opener. So it's an important game." This loss is really backbreaking for them, and while I do think Duke is probably an 8 or 9 win team, this was one of the most embarrassing and disappointing losses of the Sweeney era. He said, quote, "I'm just trying to win the next game. We've got to go win the next week, and this is college football, anything can happen." The sad thing is Clemson has now lost their opener for the second time in 3 years, and this was their worst ACC loss since 2014. He still said this does not change his expectations for the team, as he said, quote, "People are going to see the score and judge this team, but I love this football team and I see a lot of opportunity here." Cade Klubnik has also bought into that narrative, and he thinks this is going to turn into a great Cinderella story. He said, quote, "This is just going to be such a great story. Are we going to respond, or are we going to let this linger? Ultimately, our goal is to play in 15 games and finish 14-1. We can't go undefeated now, but there's a lot of games left." He also noted that Clemson lost to Pitt in 2016 off that field goal and still went on to win the national championship, which is true. So looking ahead, what could we expect from Clemson the remainder of the year? Well, let's take a look at their schedule. In terms of their next few weeks, they first play Charleston Southern, who went 2-8 last year, and barely beat North Greenville 13-10 this weekend. After that, they play Florida Atlantic, who's now led by Tom Herman and Casey Thompson, and they killed Monmouth in their Week 1 game. While I definitely don't think the Charleston Southern game will be competitive, who knows if FAU will give them a run for their money. After that, they then have to play Florida State. This was supposed to be the biggest game of the ACC, and probably still is, but after the Seminoles destroyed LSU this past weekend, and after Clemson lost last night, many have to wonder if the tables have turned and this is going to be Florida State's game to lose instead of Clemson's to lose. The team we saw last night is definitely not going to beat Florida State, and that would definitely be a loss. After that, they go on the road to Syracuse, and they look decently impressive in Week 1, but they played a bad team, and then they also play Wake Forest. I'd still say both of those are probably going to be wins, but the Syracuse game will definitely be close, as that game is always an Achilles heel for the Tigers. After that, things get a little bit more difficult, as they go on the road to Miami, NC State, and then host Notre Dame. Based on what we saw last night, I'd say Clemson loses 2 of those 3 games. I think the Fighting Irish will beat them, and then either Miami or NC State will. and I don't really have any idea which one of those two I would pick, but that right there would be their 4th loss of the year. To finish the season, they played Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and I don't see them losing to the Yellow Jackets, and then I see them losing to either North Carolina or South Carolina. I don't think they lose to the Gamecocks again, so I'm going to give Drake May and the Tar Heels the benefit of the doubt and say they win. That right there would put Clemson at a 7-5 record. Now that I think about it, maybe I'll say they go 8-4, but I don't trust them to beat Florida State, Notre Dame, or North Carolina right now, and they could easily drop one of those road games to Syracuse, Miami, NC State, or South Carolina. Things aren't looking super great for Clemson right now, but maybe they'll righten the ship and figure it all out. I mean, they have had some early losses and figured it out over the last few years, but something about this just feels different. Is Dabo starting to lose his touch? Did they just whiff on the quarterback position? Or is Dabo's stubbornness to use the transfer portal gonna bite him? That I don't know, and that's why I need your guys' help. What do you guys think of this Clemson team? What the heck went wrong last night, and what are your expectations for the future? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you're going to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.